So,
Hi, my name is Kimberly Mejia,
and my name is Daisy Paxor.
and today we'll be discussing the effect of teenage marriage on fertility in Botswana.
Okay, so to explore teenage marriage and fertility in Botswana, we formulated a research question. What is the effect of teenage marriage on fertility in Botswana? Are women who marry when they are 19 or younger more likely to have kids? So, why does this matter? This question is a social and cultural issue analyzing how early life decisions, such as teenage marriage, can have long-term effects on an individual, and this can also influence future generations. Exploring this question can raise awareness and inform policymaking. In order to answer our research question, we looked at the FER2 data set from Botswana's 1988 Demographic and Health Survey, gathered by James Higgins in the Woodridge dataset. This dataset includes 4,361 observations and 27 variables, either being continuous or indicator variables, though we had found out that there was no variable that captured teen marriage, and so we decided to transform AgeFM, which stood for Age of First Marriage, already in the dataset into an indicator variable called AgeFM underscore below EQ19, assigning a value of 1 for marriages at age 19 or younger and 0 otherwise. Besides this variable, we took account of other variables like education, birth control use, electricity access, and those who lived in the urban area. Our initial hypothesis is that women who married at the age 19 or younger will have more children than those who married later on. So what did we run? We ran two least ordinary squares model, one of them being a short regression, which took a look at the relationship between teenage marriage and fertility, without taking account of any other variables, unlike the long regressions where we did include variables include controls such as education, if women ever used birth control, if they had access to electricity, and if they live in an urban area. These controls allowed us to see the true effect of teenage marriage on fertility, and it helped us determine whether teenage marriage itself impacts fertility or if the observed effects are due to other variables.
Yes. So, as mentioned before, we ran two regressions. The first regression that we ran was a regression without controls and only the modified version of AgeFM, which was AgeFM below EQ19. Here we regressed the modified version as a 0, 1 indicator variable on children ever born. With no controls, the average effect on children ever born of being married as a teen is an increase of 0.21 children ever born. This was not statistically significant, and the intercept of 3.6 revealed that the average children of ever born who were not first married as teenagers, not including any other controls. In the longer regression with education as a control, the effects of teenage marriage on fertility in Botswana remain statistically insignificant. And for an additional unit in education, children ever born would decrease by 20%. And if women ever had used contraception before, children ever born would have increased by 95%. And if women have access to electricity, children ever born will increase by 90%. And lastly, if the woman lives in an urban area, children ever born will decrease by 71%. And while the variables of teenage marriage and access to electricity are not statistically significant, the variables of education, use of birth control, and living in an urban area were statistically significant. Before claiming whether there's a causal relationship between teenage marriage on fertility in Botswana, we'd like to define causality. Causality refers to the relationship between two events or variables where one directly influences or brings out the other. And now we're going to be assessing our hypothesis and seeing if we were right. Our original hypothesis stated that women who were married at the age of 19 or younger will have more children than those who married later on. But what we actually found was that the causal relationship between teenage marriage and fertility were statistically insignificant. This tells us that there isn't enough evidence to confidently assert that a relationship between um, uh, teenage marriage and fertility exists based on just the data. And some of the statistically significant controls that we found on our second regression, like mentioned before, were education, use of birth control, living in an urban area. And the two that were statistically insignificant were teenage marriage and access to electricity. Lastly, we'd like to go over the policy implications and future research. Policy focus. Rather than focusing solely on preventing teenage marriage, policies may need to target broader social factors like improving education, increasing access to healthcare, and empowering women economically, as there are factors more strongly associated with fertility outcomes. And as in for future research, future studies should really focus on, or they could focus on how education delays marriage and childbearing, and how birth control access influences fertility decisions. And lastly, how urban rural differences in healthcare and cultural factors impact fertility.
And that concludes our presentation on teenage marriage and fertility in Botswana.
Thank you.